Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. Chronologically, we want to actually probably publish this because it's called Horrifying. This is called Horrifying Holidays. It's a holiday spook fest. It's an anthology, and I'm going to keep showing this throughout. It's an anthology, by the way, that I had read a chunk of it, and I wrote to Gary, who then actually published it. My review was that this is a delightful but still very spooky literary romp with Christmas themes, some true and some not. It was a hugely engaging anthology, and I reiterate that now. So we're here to do a holiday show, a Christmas show, to kind of talk about. We mostly never look at Christmas in kind of a spooky way, but there's much depth and much involvement with Christmas, a wonderful holiday, my favorite holiday, and spooky stuff. So we've got a great group of writers and poets here to talk about their contributions to horrifying holidays. We'll talk about fiction and nonfiction themes, and I'm really excited to do this because I'm a great believer, and we were just chatting about all this. I'm a great believer in the spooky aspects of Christmas, beginning with none other than Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol. So I've done my monologue, and this should be a lot of fun to get input and thoughts from you all. So I'll turn it over to Gary Hill, the writer, the editor of Horrifying Holidays. Take it away, Gary.
Well, first off, thank you, Calvin, and thank you for doing the blurb for the book. That was wonderful. I really like the fact that you did that. And I guess I would say, not say that I'm the writer. I did write, I think, 7 pieces in here, but lots of other people obviously contributed. I guess I'm more the curator and the editor of it. And I think maybe everybody should. I think I've been on your what is it, podcast enough times. I think probably people know who I am, but maybe we'll get everybody else to kind of introduce themselves, and we'll start with my lovely wife Diane over here.
Thank you.
Kind of tell them who you are, and you can tell them a little bit about what you contributed to the book and what you've got going on, that kind of stuff. Sorry to put you on the spot and make you go first.
That's okay.
You're always first in my book, so.
Oh, thank you, Eddie. My name is Diane, as he said. I had a story in here about a haunted railway station in England. The Ickenham or Ickenham, I don't know how they pronounce it, tube station. And it's supposedly a woman fell onto the tracks and she was electrocuted. And she comes back, and this was around Christmas time, and she comes back every Christmas and she haunts the place wearing a bright red scarf, waving frantically before she vanishes. And that story was so creepy. I would love to go there and see that. I want to see if I can experience the same thing. That'd probably be the year she's taken the year off, but I don't know. But I'm working on a book. I've been working on a book for 20 years. I keep saying I'm working on it, and I just haven't gotten it.
You've gotten a lot of it written.
Yeah, but it's slow going. Yeah, I'm working on what is it? An autobiography, a memoir? What? I'm not
I guess
really
it's
sure.
It's a little bit of both, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully I'll get that finished in the next year. Oh boy.
I identify with you, Diane, because I've been working on. No, I do.
Oh, wow.
Great identification, because I started a few years ago a fictional memoir, fictional, based on stuff I know, and it's one of the loneliest. Well, we're all writers here. It's one of the loneliest things in the world to do, and you got to be so hugely motivated. It's like climbing, Mount Everest. It's a mountain to climb.
Oh, yeah, it is. Wow. I thought it was just because I was lazy that I couldn't
Not
do
at
that.
all. It's hard. So next, let's go with Frank. A little intro.
Okay, I'm Frank Coffman, poet, short fiction writer. I haven't done the novel yet. Retired college professor of English, creative writing, and journalism. And about 2.5 years ago now, retired. In the meantime, or since then, a little bit before the retirement, I got back into writing actively, and of course, since retirement, quite a bit. Got three published collections of my poetry out. I've got a couple fiction collections coming out early 2022. One with my occult detective character and his sidekicks, and another that's just 11 weird, horrific, supernatural stories. So I've been busy mostly with writing and editing. I've reinvigorated my publishing entity, Mind's Eye Publications, and trying to launch a journal come next March. I call it Journ-E, JOURN-E, the Journal of Imaginative Literature. I'm going to try to cover, and I've had a lot of subs so far, adventure, detection, fantasy, horror, and science fiction, all in the same sort of 5-part journal each half year. So been busy. And I have one poem, I think, in the Horrifying Holidays book, but most of it is prose. I'm glad also that Gary included Dickens' classic Christmas Carol, because a lot of people don't see that as a ghost story. It certainly is.
You might want to you can tell people a little bit about your poem too, that you did for it. Because that poem actually leads off the book. I don't.
Oh, does it?
I don't know
Yeah.
if you haven't seen a copy.
I'm proud of you. I haven't yet received my copy. I did a poem on, actually Gary suggested the idea. I did a poem on Krampus, since Santa isn't necessarily too spooky. He is in some of those 1980s horror movies, but this is, did you want me to read through that, or?
It's
a short one. It's a sonnet. It's 14 lines.
I guess it's a yes.
So I call it "He's Gonna Find Out," and I have a little epigraph here, taken from, of course, a familiar set of lines. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad. And I leave it at that. So I'll begin here. It's a little 14-line sonnet, as they all are. With cloven hooves and long curved horns on head, below a goat, but above a man-like shape. If you're marked down into his book of dread, for you there is likely no hope of escape. On the 5th of December, he will come around in search of children who've been very bad. If any trace of wickedness is found, then it will be too late to wish you had been kinder, friendly, loving, doing good. On Christmas, he'll return with chains and whips of birch twigs and a sack. It's understood, whipping's the best to hope for. If he slips you into the sack, it's known full well, cruel Krampus will then carry you to hell.
Powerful.
So,
Very nice.
So a little bit of a compression of the Krampus myth. I read up a little bit on it, but there are various versions of it and him, in different parts of Europe, especially. But He's sort of the antithesis of
I was
Santa.
just gonna say, this is the antithesis of Santa.
Yeah,
Yeah, everything that Santa represents, this is the opposite. So this wouldn't appear in a children's book necessarily.
not usually, although strangely in Europe, they have, in some areas, I think especially in Germany, they have actually nights, Krampus night and stuff like that, where there are hideous figures masked walking through the streets, actually with these twigs of birch, and they'll actually come up and whack you. People come and gather to actually see this procession, but there's actually live performance stuff, and all these guys dress up with their Krampus masks and hideous costumes.
Would you say this is designed to make people behave?
I think it's like one of the typical stuff in folklore where, I guess, or religion, you could say too, there's the devil, there are demons, there are things that happen bad to you if you do the wrong stuff, if you don't live a good life. And so, it's one of the incentives to do good is to threaten you with what happens, what will happen if you're not good, the boogeyman and everything else that could be a problem.
Well, it's even the Santa thing. If you're a bad kid, you're going to get coal in your stocking.
Right. Yeah. That's about the worst thing Santa does.
Yeah. He's a little tame compared to Krampus.
Next up, Stephen. A little bit of an intro. Take it away. I did love Christmas Creeps. I told you, but do a little bio for everybody.
Okay. Well, my name is Stephen Osborne. I've written quite a few novels, lots and lots of short stories. Some of my novels, there's the Duncan Andrews thriller series. Christmas Creeps, the story in this anthology, is part of that world, so to speak. There's also written one called Raven's Rest, which was quite a nice Halloween-y type story. Bunch of others, couple of books of true ghost stories, Ghosts of Northern Illinois and South Bend Ghosts. And I've written a Doctor Who story for Big Finish Productions. So that's my little bio there.
What I read last night, Christmas Creeps, is that part of a series? Your character?
Yes, that's part of the Duncan Andrews series.
Okay. And I thought it was. I said to you, I thought it was delightful because you take a subject. I'm not going to give stuff away. That's not for me to do. But you take kind of a serious subject and create rather delightful character. I thought. About it and the whole storyline, Dennis, that it was just a really it was a fun read. Let's talk a little bit about
Actually, one thing we should
Yes.
mention Glenn as well. Glenn couldn't make it because of tech issues, but Glenn Tilson is a gent from Toronto, Canada, and he contributed a story called Christmas Presents. That's PRESENCE rather than PRENT or PRESENTS. And it's a very short little story, but it's kind of creepy about why a cat is looking at the top of a Christmas tree. So that's, yeah. I just wanted to mention Glenn, make sure he gets a mention because he certainly deserves it.
okay, perfect. I wanted to thank you. And we talked about this before we went on air. You included in Horrifying Holidays, you included Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol. So my question to you is why?
Well, I think for one thing, when you start talking about spooky Christmas stuff, at least in this country, people start thinking that's really strange. And in fact, in my Spooky Ventures page, I actually had somebody kind of go after me a little bit on it a week or so ago. My whole slogan of put the spooky back into Christmas. And, you know, it seems odd to a lot of people in this country, but in the UK, it's a tradition to tell ghost stories at Christmas time. And like you mentioned, you know, it's kind of odd that we have the spooky time at Halloween, because Halloween's kind of early after this, after the equinox, whereas Christmas is right at the solstice, the darkest time of the year. So it just seems like the time that you would get, you know, spooky stories. And then I thought, you know, everybody loves A Christmas Carol, but if you think about it, it's actually a pretty spooky story. You've got 4 ghosts, and there's one scene in there which, you know, I have to admit, I had never actually read the story before. I'd seen plays of it every year. I'd go see the play, and I've seen multiple versions of the movie, but I'd never actually read it. And to me, the little bit where the one ghost takes Scrooge to his own grave and doesn't speak, but he just points to the gravestone, which Scrooge won't look at. And Scrooge asks him, well, is that me? And he points to Scrooge and then points to the tombstone again. And I just thought that was a really chilling scene. I mean, you know, that's right up there with a lot of the Gothic horror stuff. So a lot of people don't think of that as being horror, but it really is. There's that whole spooky side to it. So I kind of put it in there. I grabbed a couple of other public domain things to put in there. I sort of like doing these public domain things in here because, again, a lot of people have never read these old stories, and they're good stories. So you put them in a collection like this, you generate some interest, and maybe they'll read some of this older stuff.
Right.
And I was just hoping that there was going to be enough space to put A Christmas Carol in, and fortunately there was. So we got it in there. And besides, it's Dickens. I mean, you got to love Dickens.
Right.
Dickens he's such a great writer. He was such a great writer, and he's got such thought-provoking themes.
Right. He's, you know, a lot of folks, I think probably most folks have not read A Christmas Carol. They're so used to the Alistair Sim or any of the many later versions and twists. But and a lot of people don't even think, hey, it's a ghost story. You know, that hits them late. They think it's a Christmas story, which it also is. But the tradition, as you noted, Gary, of telling spooky stories or horror stories or ghost stories at Christmas, at least in Britain and many other countries in Europe, is a long tradition. In fact, probably the greatest ghost story writer, at least certainly the one to follow, Montague Rhodes James, M.R. James, professor at Eton, the ghost stories of an antiquary, more ghost stories of an antiquary. He was what today we'd call maybe a folklorist, a mythologist, certainly a cleric, working with especially traditional stuff. And he told his students and his family these stories he'd make up at Christmas time. And they finally convinced him, both family and students, that he should, hey, why don't you publish that stuff? It's pretty good. And indeed, he's considered England's pretty much father of the ghost story, or the master of it.
Well,
we're talking
and
100 years ago, early 1800s, late 1800s.
Let me ask you a question, Frank, because you would probably know this better than I do. I know it literally because of Doctor Who, because they showed it in Doctor Who. And I thought it was really a cool tradition if it's real. You might know, did Charles Dickens in his lifetime, because what they showed in one of the episodes of Doctor Who is that he would go around to theaters at Christmas time and tell ghost stories in front of live audiences. Is that, do you know if that's true?
I believe that's true. And he wrote several kind of, well, there's a spooky undertone in some of his novels, certainly too, but his other short story, The Signalman, is
that's a great one.
Is a classic. And The Mystery of Edwin Drude, which was never finished, has some Gothic or sort of spooky elements in it, the way it starts. There have been a lot of people who've tried to do an ending to that book. I'm not sure how successful they've been, but he died before he could finish it. As you may know, Dickens did almost everything, which was smart, one sequence at a time for the magazines rather than a published novel. And so his plan, which works pretty well, is to always end each chapter with a suspenseful note, like making people want to read on. He'd leave you hanging at the end of each chapter because that was the end of that installment in the magazine. So one of the reasons he's a great read is that keeps on pulling you through. His plan was perfect. Sort of like J.K. Rowling's, hitting a target audience and then having them grow up with her characters, laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah. That's a great story. Imagine to become a billionaire with a B from writing originally on the back of napkins.
As a poet, I'm not looking to have that happen to me very soon. Or as a short fiction writer, for that matter.
And what was funny with her too, with Rowling's, was then after Harry Potter, I think largely to prove to herself that it wasn't just a fluke and that because it was Harry Potter is why it caught on, she wrote a detective story, I think it was, and published it under a man's name instead of her own name, and it didn't sell until people found out it was her, and suddenly everybody bought it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Going back to Dickens in the Christmas Carol, because I've written a couple of essays. We talked about it again before we went on air, and the fact that you included that. So last night I read chunks of A Christmas Carol, and I marveled at Dickens' writing. And I'm not a big fan of Shakespeare, not then, not now, not ever. It is what it is. But Dickens is just a beautiful writer, and I wrote some essays, and I've always regarded A Christmas Carol as kind of a spooky ghost story. And the fact that I've watched Alistair Sim, maybe 50 times, 100 times, I just keep watching, especially over Christmas. I just keep watching it. But my takeaway was the brilliance of Dickens. Maybe we can address that. And I quoted. He wrote in 1843, and before he went on air, I wrote it down. When Scrooge asked the ghost of Christmas present, who are those children under his robe, and the ghost says they are man's. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, ignorance. And what got me and made me write a little essay about it is he wrote in 1843, and not a thing has changed. It's nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Ignorance. And every day we see evidences of ignorance. So I applaud you for putting this in and making this a topic of horrifying holidays. And for no other reason, people should read this, because there's Dickens right there for you.
And let me say, I mean, just like you pointed out, it's kind of, in a way, it's refreshing, because everybody talks a lot about how this time is so different than every other time. And in some ways, it clearly is. I mean, every time's different, but clearly some of the threats that we've got ahead of us now are able to do a lot more damage, just because we as human beings are capable of doing a lot more damage now because of our technology than we could, 150 years ago. But the ignorance was always there. It's always been a part of our species. I mean, there were people who thought the internet was going to fix that. If anything, it's probably made it worse.
Oh,
It's allowed ignorant people to feel like they know more. They're more empowered in their
that's
ignorance,
true.
you know? But it's kind of refreshing to know that what we are going through isn't really unique. People have survived through it before. I mean, again, the threat's a lot deeper now. It's a lot worse, but just because of our capabilities. But the stakes are higher, I guess I would put it. But the situation we're in isn't unique.
Well, I'd agree. The human situation doesn't change.
No.
But this has been warned by other people, you know, warned us about by other people in Dickens. In turn of the last century, Henry Adams, the grandson and great grandson of the two presidents, wrote an autobiographical book that he called The Education of Henry Adams. He writes about himself in the third person. But even then, in the year 1900 or so, he said, we've unleashed forces we can no longer control. And of course, Alvin Toffler's book in early 70s, Future Shock, there's a lot of truth to that. The human condition, we grow up at the same rate that pretty much humans always have, and yet our generations are hit more and more and more with hyper advanced technology, things we're, you know, not able maybe to deal with as easily as possible. And certainly, I don't know, it's as a teacher, as a professor, one of my frequently quoted quotes of myself, what we're doing is fighting a great holding action. Ignorance can't really ever be defeated, perhaps. I know that's a great wish, but we need to keep on keeping on with as much inculcating of enlightenment as we can, and, you know, hoping that people see some of the light and there's enough of a righteous remnant to keep the world going. There are my doubts now, though. You know, the World Global Conference on Climate. I don't know.
We're in a position now where if we don't do the right thing and we don't do it soon, there isn't going to be a later, you know.
Yeah.
50 years, 100 years from now, it's going to be really, really hard for the human race to continue, for any of the species to continue, unless we get it right now.
Correct. And we're down. I put together a little climate group, which you're all welcome to join. They're all climate authors all over the world, literally. Paris, Ecuador, Scotland, where they're hosting COP26. I just did it because we're relatively, I use the term loosely, we're relatively contemporaries here, which is nice. And I did go to the first Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970, and I've never been the same since that, because I realized back then we got problems. And I look back, you know, it's 50 years. It's 50 years and 51 years. And my observation is not much has changed, maybe worse.
So many missed opportunities.
Yeah, and I you know, Greta Thunberg, that little teenager who became world famous when she went and spoke to the UN and said, I don't want to hear blah 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 anymore, and it caused a lot of young people to rise up. Didn't change much, because my impression of COP26 is blah blah blah, and we just
didn't the Queen even say something like that? She said they're going to do a lot of talking and not much else, or something like that, on a hot mic that she didn't realize was hot.
Yeah, and it really should be a topic here. We're talking about Christmas,
Yeah,
spooky stuff, and we wind up talking about, and we should throw that in, because the more you keep hearing it and keep hearing it and keep hearing it, maybe some of it sinks in, because we're really running down, if we don't fix things by the end of this decade and make some serious, and we don't stick to the 1.5 degree rise in temperature, if it goes like 1/10 above that, I mean, it's just messed up. See, you people in Illinois are really lucky. You don't have to worry about the ocean.
Well, I saw something the other day that said that, that was showing like the areas and how they're going to be impacted. And we're in a nice green swath where we're going to be reasonably safe from climate change here. Except I was telling Diane, the biggest issue we're going to have is the people who are in the areas that are uninhabitable are going to all be flocking this way. And we're going to suddenly have a lot of overpopulation, which is not going to be good.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to have to worry about that one. And imagine what you think housing prices are bad now, when you suddenly got all these people from Florida and Arizona and everywhere coming.
And New Jersey. And
Yeah.
New Jersey.
Well, the
Yeah.
problem with the Midwest that I foresee coming, the Deep South had it this year, but the tornadoes and flooding, we've had problems with like that before, of course, with the Mississippi and all of its tributaries, and the Missouri and the various rivers that flow. There will be mostly river floods, but tornadoes certainly happen around here, and
they're getting worse.
And the whole climate range of change of temperature could be a problem. Of course, we've always had that too. I remember one year, I think I was down at University of Illinois, 83, and we had a July where it almost never got below 100, and the next January we had an actual 30 below. But that may be more common down the road.
Yeah, the weather extremes are going to be more common. The really big events are going to be more common.
So I wanted to jump back to Stephen, because you create such a fascinating characters. Again, I don't like to give stuff away. In Christmas Creeps, I mean, the whole story was great, but there are a couple of things that I didn't. Well, I started to talk about this before we went on air about the ghost box, and you write about that, and your character uses a ghost box in your story, Christmas Creeps. It's real, the ghost box, correct?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And why don't you tell folks what that is?
Well, there are actually a couple different types, but mostly it's the one I think that I had him using in the story is it cycles through FM signals, I believe, and picks up words, phrases. The phrase would have to be very short, but you can get short phrases. And often it'll either be an audio thing that you can hear, or they do have some that it's written then and you can see the word that comes up. Sometimes those are a little better, because sometimes when it's audio, you hear something and you're not quite sure what you've heard. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they come out very, very clear. So yeah, Robbie was using one of those.
Yes, yes. And also there's something when I was a little kid, I watched, and I mean a little kid, there was this character on TV, Zachary. I don't know if you guys remember him. Actually, I met him a couple of years ago. He was 98 then, a couple of years ago. But he had these, he would show a Frankenstein movie, Dracula movie, Bela Lugosi, and he would.
He was a horror host?
Yes, exactly.
Kind of like Sven Gulli.
Yeah, he was a horror host, I guess big here in the East. The point I wanted to make is, watching him, and when I was a kid, I was so overcome with the stuff he did that I used to babysit for my two younger sisters, and I would be watching Zachary and Dracula, and maybe I was 11, 12 years old, and I was petrified. So when my parents told me I had a babysitter going to the movies, I went into the kitchen and I fumbled through my mother's spices, and I pulled out a thing of garlic. So, a true story. And
Just-
I opened up all the windows in the house, and on the windowsills, I sprayed garlic salt powder. True story.
You needed Wolfbane too.
Yeah, I mean, I would have done that, the Wolfman.
That's a little rarer. I don't think we have any in our spice
I don't
cabinet.
think we have any Wolfbane around here.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, we had a horror host in Indiana called Sammy Terry. Had the little ghost face. He wore a red cape, and if we had a babysitter on a Friday night, we were allowed to stay up and watch Sammy Terry. And I remember watching. I don't know how old I was, but I was very young, and we were watching Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which is a wonderful movie. It scared the living hell out of me, though, because I was a kid. I didn't realize that there was no way the Wolfman was going to maul Lou Costello. Every time he lunged at him, I was like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
I can remember we had here in Rockford, there was a show called Dimension 13, which they did the old horror movies. And I remember, I don't know, I must have been maybe 7 or 8 years old, maybe younger. And I remember I begged my mother one night to be able to stay up because they were going to have the Pit and the Pendulum on there. And I was like, no, I won't be scared. It's fine. I won't be scared. And I watched the Pit and the Pendulum. And I spent the entire night with the light on in my bedroom watching for ghosts because I was terrified.
Vincent Price
for a
or
long time. What's that?
Vincent Price?
Yes.
Right. I'm from mid-state Illinois, Decatur, the soybean capital of the world. And the local station, the ABC station there, was the Decatur only station. The Champaign was CBS, and back when the rabbit ears on the TV and the whole thing. But we had a good friend of our family, the Cecils, their son, Robert, who was older than I by a decade or so. He became Trebor, Robert backwards. And every Friday, I think it was Friday or Saturday night, there would be one of the old Universal horror movies or something like that. Sometimes horror sci-fi, but usually they did all the Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the classic four, and then but he would do the intermissions and the lead-ins and outs of commercials and stuff like that, and had his own makeup and the background for you'd visit. They called it shock theater. So same thing I think went on a lot of places.
Yeah. The other thing I took away, Stephen, and that's why I told my story about garlic, was salt. Does spirits don't like salt? Is that a fact, or is that
right? Putting it across the threshold, it's one of the supposed stop them, that sort of thing. Other myths, like you have to invite them in. Don't invite them in, make them stay outside.
Okay.
And there's all sorts of twists on them. You mentioned earlier how how Halloween happens to seem to be the one people are thinking of, this, the spooky holiday. Well, that of course goes back to the Celtic and the old European quarters and cross quarters and Samhain, and the myths about some, including sacrifices, some human, anciently around that time. But yeah, you're right. The solstice, you'd think the darkest time of the year should be, and it is symbolically all around the world. A time of the end, a time of the new beginning, that sort of thing.
In keeping with what we're talking about, Christmas being a spooky time of the year, I watch periodically Wuthering Heights, it's not Christmas, but the last scene when Heathcliff and Kathy are united again, she comes back. I mean, it's in a snowstorm. So what's implied for me is that it's kind of close to Christmas. And I don't think anybody's ever brought that up, but since we're talking about Christmas and the spooky nature, to me, that's a spooky, that whole end of the movie was very spooky, the end of the book. And it's implied to me that Christmas has to be right around there when that's
Another thing we should maybe mention is, and Frank sort of referenced it a little bit with the 80s and the spooky movies of Santa Claus, but actually, I mean, the whole tradition thing, perhaps the very first slasher film, unless you consider Psycho first slash, that's Diane's first movie, her favorite movie is Psycho, but Psycho you could say is the first slasher movie, but if not, the one that's probably the most influential, John Carpenter admitted it was a big influence on Halloween, was Black Christmas, which is very, it's sort of a very underground movie, but I mean,
it was pushed underground.
Yeah, it was pushed underground.
It was
And
banned by.
If you
a lot
look
of
at it, there have been a number of movements to do spooky movies for Christmas, Black Christmas. There was the Silent Night, Deadly Night, and they've all been met with a lot of pushback, largely from religious groups, and they've pushed them underground. But the funny thing of it is, if you watch, they actually get them a lot more attention they probably would have otherwise gotten too. Funny thing about Black Christmas is that the guy who did Black Christmas is the guy who later did A Christmas Story with Ralphie and the Red Ryder BB gun.
Yeah, same guy. Yeah,
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
Wow.
Exactly.
So you're telling me Black Christmas and a Christmas Story?
It's either the same director or the same producer. I think it's the same director. Yeah.
Wow.
And if you haven't seen Black Christmas, there are actually 3 versions. I've seen all 3, and I recommend all 3. But that first one, I mean, that first one's got some of the things that are in that movie wind up in a lot of movies later. It was very influential.
Right.
It's very low budget, but it's very creepy.
The director, Eli Roth, is doing a series on, has done, I think it's been rebroadcast.
Yeah, he's on his 3rd season.
Horror in the cinema and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's AMC or History Channel. It's one of the
History of Horror, I think it's called.
The History of Horror, yeah.
Or Shudder, it might be both.
Going through especially cinematic horror, is focused on, pardon the pun, focused on film and movies and not literature. But Eli Roth's History of Horror in the Cinema or something like that. Pretty good series, well done. Interviews with directors and actors, and interesting. Worth watching.
Did you do Black Christmas?
Yes, he did. And in one of the episodes, they did a special on holiday horror. I think they've actually got one that's just, one of the segments is on that. So there were pretty much every horrific Christmas movie, all the bad Santas and and that sort of thing are in that episode.
I actually loved the very first Silent Night, Deadly Night. I liked the way they set up why he became a crazy killer. And one of my favorite scenes in there is when he approaches a little girl and you think for sure he's going to kill this little girl. And he asks her, "Have you been good?" And she says, "Yes, Santa." And so instead of killing her, he gives her a gift. Now, mind you, his mind's all tweaked and he gives her a bloody box cutter that he's killed people with, but he gives her a gift and lets her be.
Yeah.
So sweet.
Yeah.
Isn't the backstory that he witnessed both of his parents murdered on Christmas or something like that? Or-
Yeah, they were coming home from something, and they saw a car broke down, and there was a Santa Claus standing there with the car broke down.
Hmm.
Well, as soon as they stopped to help him, the Santa pulled out a gun, shot both of the parents, and robbed them,
Yeah.
and the kid went crazy from that. And then he grows up, and he's been through therapy, but he's at this job, and they decide they want him to play Santa Claus. Bad idea.
Yeah.
Which I thought was actually kind of a clever setup and kind of a clever explanation for why he went nuts. But
It's kind of like Batman, only
yeah,
Mhm.
more sinister.
perhaps more realistic.
I've never seen Silent Night, Deadly Night, but
It's hard to find. You can find. I went looking for it last year to stream it, and I found some of the sequels, but I couldn't find the original anywhere.
Is that the sorority house killings and stuff, or no?
No, I think he goes around just generally killing people. I know there's one scene where he impales a woman on some antlers, on deer antlers. But
As
yeah.
you do.
Yeah, well, I mean, what else are you going to do with deer
Yeah.
antlers, right?
They're there.
Yeah.
Might as well use them.
so Gary, I wanted to ask you, in your Secret Santa story, to me, that with my background, that could have been nonfiction. Something like that to have happened in real life. With that's just purely your imagination, or you?
Yeah, I actually the germ of an idea that started that story, and sort of gives you a little glimpse into how my mind works for doing stories. My friend Heath and I have talked about it, and he says that writers are either planners or pantsers. I tend to be a little bit of both. In that case, I was definitely a pantser, in that I just came up with the idea that Secret Santa would be a good idea for a spooky Christmas story. And then I thought, what if somebody starts getting gifts and they don't know who's sending them to them? And gradually they start getting a little creepier, and it leads them into some kind of mystery. And then I just sort of wrote the rest of it as I went along. It just sort of grew. I mean, and that's how a lot of my stuff happens. A lot of times I have just a bare framework, and then I start filling in details. And sometimes the characters will fill their own details in because they're a certain type of person and they're going to react in a certain type of way. But yeah, so that's just sort of, there's no real life story behind that one.
Okay, because
I mean,
then
and I will say, I consider that a big compliment that you actually thought there might have been.
yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because later in the nonfiction section, you write about a hotel.
Oh yeah, the Crescent Hotel.
Yeah, and this is real, and the Christmas tree goes from one side of the room to the other.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that could be fiction too, but it's
And
not.
now that one, I wrote all my nonfiction pieces. I've got 4 of them in there, and all my nonfiction pieces. What I do a lot of times when I'm trying to put one of these together, sometimes I've got another vampire one coming up next year, and Rick Hale has already sent me a couple nonfiction pieces for it. But generally, I get whatever I get from the writers, and then I look at it and say, okay, what do I have room for beyond that? And if I've got room for nonfiction stuff and I can find stories for it, I found the information about the tube station and sent that to Diane to do, because I like to include her on these, and she's really good at doing research and writing stuff up. And so then I just sort of approach those nonfiction stories, unless it's something where I can actually go and check it out myself. I'll just approach them as research papers. You find the sources, you write it up, and I did all those after Secret Santa was written. So Yeah, those were written at the end.
Okay, I'm inclined to, I don't know if I had brought this up, to kind of just go off topic a tad and ask each one of you, it's kind of spiritual in a way, but here it goes, and you can, I think it's interesting, and it's kind of a good way to kind of wrap up, because we could talk about this stuff for a long time. We could talk about favorite Christmas movies, and in each one, interestingly, there's always an element of something spooky. Hey, Home Alone. I'll bring that up before I even. Home Alone to me is spooky as hell. When that
Oh my
kid-
God, did you hear there's someone suggested, I love this idea. Someone suggested, if you're familiar with the Purge series, that they should do a Purge movie and have it be Kevin all grown up protecting his house on Purge night.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Interesting. They when Kevin is in the basement and it's Christmas, and the fireplace thing in the basement, the heater, it kind of opens and closes. I mean, that's spooky stuff. And
Actually, you know what I've thought about for a while, because Diane told me about a place that she lived in where they had one of those big furnaces with like the spider pipes and everything going through the basement.
Octopus.
Octopus, you call it octopus, that's right. The octopus pipes going through. And I thought, and I've sort of had, this is one I've just sort of, again, you get a grain of an idea and it just sort of sits there. And I've had the idea of doing sort of a story based on one of those furnaces and having it come to life or something, but I haven't really fleshed it out yet. So yeah,
Well,
that furnace is that kind of thing.
it's a scary, I was really scared at that scene. It's just the way, even the way they filmed it, and for him being a little kid like that, and the whole spirit of the film at nighttime, and the lights, and there's no life, there's no cars driving down the street. It's almost as if he's in an island. There was just a spiritual, I thought, element. Now that we're talking about spooky stuff in Christmas, I thought the movie had spooky elements to it. And now they're doing commercials.
Well,
Catherine O'Hara is doing a commercial with Kevin Hart.
a lot of them have supernatural elements, the Christmas movies. It's a Wonderful Life, got an angel visitation. You've got of course, the Christmas Carol. You've got, and then almost all of them have some supernatural element. A Miracle on 34th Street. The real Santa. The guy really is Santa, right? So the Santa Claus exists. A lot of people.
Even the Santa Claus.
Yeah, Santa Claus himself as a
I mean, the
as a
movie,
character.
the movie, The Santa Claus. I mean,
Elves,
that's got tons of magic in it.
flying reindeer,
Oh, wait, you're
Yeah.
so right.
talking snowmen,
Mhm.
snowmen that come alive.
You're so right, Frank.
There's
Especially Miracle on 34th Street. That last scene with the cane in the corner, it's like a wow. And you don't even have to do much. There's no explanation, there's no nothing. And it leaves you really wondering.
Uh-oh,
Right.
I've got low battery.
It leaves you
Oh.
really wondering. He's really Santa. I mean, it's powerful stuff. It's a
Yeah.
Wonderful Life. I must have watched it 100 times in Clarence, and it's pure magic. I must say, since I'm wearing a Rutgers hat, that was written by a writer named Van Doren Stern. got his first name, Van Doren Stern, who graduated Rutgers University,
There you go.
my
You
alma
got-
mater.
You guys are in my conference now, Illinois.
Yeah, we are. We beat you.
I know.
that
Well, a lot of people have beaten
huge.
Illinois lately.
That was
But
huge.
Rutgers just won a big one yesterday, didn't they? Or-
Huge beat. They beat up Indiana really,
Right,
really
right.
good, to the point where we just have to win one more game. We can go to a bowl game. I mean, that would be so wonderful to go to
On
a
the
bowl.
banks of the Raritan.
That's right. Exactly. You know, that's our alma mater song.
Yeah, I know the song.
Yes. The guy from It's a Wonderful Life, he could not find anybody to publish that. So, and his name is Philip Van Doren Stern. So he actually self-published It's a Wonderful Life back in the 30s.
Oh, that must have been hard to do back then.
Really hard to do. I mean, it was hard to do 15 years ago, to self-publish. So he did it back in the 30s, and out of sheer total utter frustration, somehow he had bumped into Frank Capra, and he handed Frank Capra the manuscript and said, "Here, do what you want with it." And that's It's a
Wow.
Wonderful Life. Great stuff. Just
He
great
wrote
stuff.
it as a novel or a short story or
It was a
or
short
as a
story.
screenplay.
It was a short story. He wrote it. It was a short story
Yeah.
that he
Mhm.
wrote. And I'm aware of that because obviously the tie into Rutgers. So I think we've covered. Does anybody want to add, throw in something? Something for underneath the tree?
One thing maybe I should add is sort of mention some of the other stories I had in there, just so people have an idea what's in there. I know we talked about Secret Santa a little. I've got two other fiction pieces. One of them being No Sugar Plums, which hatched from the idea of what if a kid saw something under the Christmas tree, someone in red that wasn't Santa Claus. And that's sort of the beginning of that story, or sort of what winds up changing this guy's life. And then I've got Home for Christmas, which is sort of, this family has a tradition of everybody coming home for Christmas. And they're not, as you find out, they're not the nicest people in the world. This Christmas doesn't quite turn out the way they had planned, though, let's put it that way. And then, like I say, I've got, as far as the nonfiction pieces, you mentioned the one about the Crescent Hotel, which has the Christmas haunting. There's also a story about a Christmas haunting that was at Alcatraz when it was still open, which the building that it was in is not there anymore, but it's a sort of recounting of that story.
Yeah, I read that. I read that too. And that kind of scared me. Alcatraz, and the fact it was kind of haunted.
Yeah, there was, and I did what I do a lot of times with these stories. Like I said, I do them like research papers. And if there's not a ton on the actual haunting, I will do a little bit of background on the place and sort of the story behind it and all that, which is what I did with all of these. Another one is about Anne Boleyn, who was King Henry VIII's second wife, and the first one he had killed. And supposedly she haunts a lot of places in England. They talk about seeing her in a lot of places, but there's one particular haunting that always takes place on Christmas with her. And then there's also a story about a house in England, place in England where there's a haunted coach that shows up every Christmas with a headless horseman on it. And so those are the other stories I have in there. I thought I should mention those.
Yes, you should. By the way, where can people get the book?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, actually, and here's the actual book.
Okay.
But the best place to get it, you can go to lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound. And
Lulu,
interestingly enough,
you know what? Why don't you send me that?
okay. And
Send me that because I'm going to publish that.
Okay, you can also look at GaryHillAuthor.com.
Oh,
I was going to
fine.
mention, this is one, I haven't been doing Amazon or distribution lately because they take such a big chunk out of what it is. So I have to raise the price to even, above what I would normally sell them for. But I was actually going to do a special edition for distribution for this one. And it was just going to be priced higher than the other one. But then what I found out was because of, I don't know if it's because of the pictures or the type of font I used or whatever, when I set up the book, it said it requires printing on premium paper instead of standard paper because of the ink coverage. And Amazon and the distribution things don't allow that. So I was like, I could do a lower quality book for it, but I didn't want to do that. So it's not on Amazon.
Okay. So, but basically GaryHillAuthor.com, that's really easy.
Yeah, and there's that one particularly you'll find on the Tales of Wonder and Dread page on the GaryHillAuthor.com site. So
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Well, this has been great. This has been improv, and it's Christmas, and it shines some really interesting lights on the whole spooky side of Christmas, which is not a bad thing. It's a positive thing. And if there's one takeaway for me, it really is a positive thing. And people don't look at it that way. The four ghosts that make up A Christmas Carol, one of the great stories, movies for me. So even though it's a little premature, I'm wishing you all a very merry and happy and healthy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
Merry Christmas to you. Merry
Yes.
Christmas to all
And
all the
and
viewers.
I said this the last time we got together. I'm saying it again now. Let's come back for any other theme that you can come up with. Valentine's Day, I don't know. You please do
I've got
come back.
The next one I've got coming out is No More New Year's, which comes out on December 2nd, which is a bunch of apocalyptic tales. That's the next collection. So
Well, let's talk about it. And
okay, I'll talk to the people who are in
absolutely
it.
talk about it. I just love dystopian apocalyptic stuff. I'm reading one right now called Sanctuary. Written by a friend of mine. It's not a pleasant book. It's very dystopian and what the world will look like as we're heading down that road. But I'd rather focus on Merry Christmas right now.
Right.
I should mention you were talking about how that the spooky side is actually kind of a good thing, and I said that somebody got into it with me a little bit on the Spooky Ventures page about it, and one of the things he said was, well, we need to focus on the light. So, well, you can't appreciate the light unless you also have the dark as a contrast to it.
That works. That light and dark, that absolutely works. But listen, I'm thrilled I met you guys back a ways, and I'm thrilled we can do this. And again, Horrifying Holidays, it's a wonderful, fun, provocative anthology, and especially because you have Dickens in there, which I think is so creative to have that. So thank you all again. Really merry, happy, healthy,
Thank you.
and all good things, and to be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.